Hello, good morning. Dear Commissioner Helena Dalli, dear EIGE Director Caroline Schill, ladies and gentlemen following us online, it is with great pleasure that we welcome you in Lisbon, even if only in this new digital form. It is unavoidable to begin by mentioning we live in a moment of extreme health crisis due to the pandemic caused by COVID-19. In the EU and worldwide, the crisis bears very serious repercussions in everyone's lives. In addition to health issues, the measures adopted to control the disease had unprecedented economic and social impacts, both on families and on companies. We know from our own experience that crises, much like scars, remain in the lives of those who have lived through them. And we know, historically and from our recent past, that crises and their scars do not affect everyone the same. They are always worse for those already most vulnerable. As you know, the Portuguese presidency regards social Europe as its main priority, as a reference of our societies. Placing our social model at the center of the recovery is a responsibility that we share. This is where European citizens expect the Union to come together as a whole. But we should bear in mind that to achieve a true inclusive recovery, we must steadfast in implementing the equality agenda. Gender equality should work as a driver for recovery. Therefore, I want to welcome the work of the European Commission in making it a priority to strive for a more equal European Union, to strive for a union of equality. To tackle the existing gaps, which risk being aggravated by this pandemic, the Commission launched precisely 1 year ago the European Strategy for Gender Equality 2025. Dear Commissioner Helena Dalli, the Portuguese presidency is strongly committed to working with you and the European Commission to further advance it. And because this is a path that we must certainly take together, I want to commend all Member States, my colleagues, for their contribution in our last informal EPSCO meeting, which allow us to understand that what we are about to approach here is a shared concern between Member States. Dear colleagues, today the Portuguese presidency invites you to take a look into the results of a research note that the European Institute for Gender Equality is compiling at our request. We will be focusing on the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19 on gender equality, because like in past crises, its impacts will not be gender neutral. They will be felt differently by men and women. In fact, some of the unequal impacts on women are already known, reproducing and even worsening inequalities that already exist. There are several reasons why women are particularly affected by this crisis. Disadvantages that continue to limit and structurally condition women's participation in work and employment are the root cause of short-term imbalances and entail long-term repercussions. When we look at many of the sectors hardest hit by the economic crisis, we see high levels of women employed. Employment losses contribute to widen existing pay and employment gaps and future gaps, such as in pensions or career paths and opportunities. Remote work, especially teleworking, brings about new challenges in terms of work-life balance. But to better act on this problem, we must understand it. We were aware that by the time we took over the Council presidency, socioeconomic consequences of COVID-19 would start to show. Thus, since the first moment, we pledged to ensure an assessment of these impacts, as well as policy responses based on hard data. On this matter, I would like to thank the European Institute for Gender Equality, particularly its director, Caroline Schill, which accepted the request of the Portuguese presidency to develop a research note on gender equality and the socioeconomic impacts of the COVID-19 crisis. This research note is extremely important as it will serve as a basis for the Council conclusions that the presidency will present. Nonetheless, more than numbers, research helps to understand and expose challenges. Behind the numbers is the hard reality women are facing with the pandemic. We must not forget these are the women overrepresented in many of the so-called essential professions. These are the women we see in the front line of the fight against COVID-19, from health, care, education, and cleaning services, overburdened with greater intensity of work, bearing increased risks to their health and stress levels, and increased difficulties in work-life balance. But what we don't often see is that these are also the women largely removed from positions and decision-making processes, who suffer most from precarious work, who are most impaired by the unequal division of unpaid work. These are the women at the front line, but that continue to be left behind. And my main message to you today is that we can only change what we can see clearly. Our presidency hopes that the facts and figures we will look upon today may be contributions to our public policies, sending a strong political signal on the importance of addressing long-term inequalities. Therefore, the policies we come up with must respond not only to cyclical inequality, but must act on structural factors of inequality. Our actions must strengthen those principles that make our Europe more just, more inclusive, and more equal. To attain this goal, we can now count on the newly launched action plan on the European Pillar of Social Rights presented yesterday. And I would like to highlight the proposal also presented yesterday for pay transparency measures. I want to reaffirm that the Presidency strongly welcomes this proposal and intends to begin negotiations. Implementing the principle of equal pay for work of equal value is vital to tackle the existing gender pay gaps, pension gaps, and protect female workers. And as I have mentioned, if we can only change what we can see with clarity, ensuring more transparency will allow us to clearly see what we need to change. It is therefore critical that the EU and Member States assume gender equality as a driver for recovery, a condition for sustainable development, and also as a response to the challenges of the future. And I salute the European Commission for introducing the need to integrate the gender perspective into the national recovery and resilience plans in a cross-cutting way, requiring evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, moments of crisis such as the one we are experiencing show the urgency of having a gender perspective in the policies we adopt. If we allow women to stay invisible in our policies, they will always be impaired. Next Monday, we mark the International Women's Day, and this is the perfect timing to recognize that the struggle for equality is a daily struggle that we need to strive to see clearly where change is needed. I hope you enjoy this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister of State for the Presidency. Good morning, everyone. My name is Catarina Marques Rodrigues. I'm a journalist focused on gender equality, diversity, and inclusion. And it's a pleasure to be with you here today. Hope you are all well, safe, and ready for a very productive and relevant morning, discussing women's rights and discussing the future of women. As the Minister said, women cannot be invisible. Actually, we have to think about their problems and about the solutions. Yes, we do have a huge female crisis with social and economic problems to solve, but we also have to see women's potential as a tool to reverse the negative problems that we are seeing right now. After the presentation of the Portuguese minister, we are going now to hear the European Commissioner for Equality, Helena Dalli, Commissioner, I know that you have got into job in December 19, and then a few months after, a pandemic started with a huge effect on women, and then you started a plan for gender equality. So 1 year after that plan that has started in 2020, what have you achieved, and what achievements would you like to highlight and show us?
Thank you, and thank you for the Portuguese presidency for organizing this seminar, and also thank you, EIGE, Carleen, for this work which you have presented to us today. Gender equality as a driver for recovery answers our call of putting forward a gender-sensitive response to a crisis that has, as we've been hearing now, disproportionately hit women harder. There's no denying that. So while the pandemic and its impact on women has a rather grim outlook, we may also see the crisis as an opportunity. Let's be optimistic. An opportunity for stepping up our efforts with regards to gender equality and women's rights, an opportunity for pushing back the backlashes, and an opportunity for delivering on our gender equality strategy. So this week marks the first year of the EU's gender equality strategy, and it pushes for faster progress by 2025. So the strategy is our framework for promoting gender equality, including as part of the EU's recovery. So yesterday we delivered on one of the key initiatives of the strategy, a proposal for a directive on pay transparency. To all the working women and the young women students or in training who are getting ready for the labor market, this is a first, but a necessary step towards our work on achieving equal pay and closing the gender pay gap. The aim of this proposal is to prevent and detect gender-based pay discrimination, to empower those women who have been discriminated against and enforce the right to equal pay, to gather more information and data which will improve our understanding of gender pay discrimination, and to pave the way for a changing business culture when it comes to pay transparency. So this proposal is a balanced one, taking into account, on the one hand, the difficulties faced by businesses as a result of the economic downturn in the current pandemic, and on the other hand, the gendered impact of the COVID crisis that has reinforced the existing bias and undervaluation of women's work, and the need to undertake action countering this worrying trend. So I know we can count on the support of the Portuguese presidency to start discussions on the directive as soon as possible. We have also seen during this health crisis the importance of speeding up efforts to tackle violence against women, work-life balance, and women's participation in decision-making. So in our gender equality strategy, we presented actions to address these persistent issues, which the pandemic has further amplified. So many member states did react to the work-life balance issue. In the first months of the pandemic, they introduced special parental leave and bonuses to allow workers to better reconcile work and care duties. It has helped in preventing workers with care duties, mostly women, as we all know, from having to leave their job due to the closing of schools and daycare centers. Some countries also offered special parental leave on a part-time basis to encourage mothers and fathers to share them. Teleworking also became more accessible, and indeed more workplaces across the EU introduced flexible working arrangements than ever before. But we should watch out for the work-life balance conflicts that teleworking has heightened. Although men are taking on more care duties than before, women's share of unpaid work has increased. So we will thus monitor the transposition of the Work-Life Balance Directive. Work-life balance measures and better funding for care systems will improve the sharing of care duties and contribute to closing the gender equality gap. It will benefit both men and women, and not only by helping to overcome the barriers to a healthy family life, but also by giving families a choice. More efforts are also necessary to empower women leaders. Progress regarding women's share of decision-making positions remains very slow and uneven across the EU, but it's in whether it's in politics or whether it's in business. We see this all over. An EIGE study has shown that also when dealing with the pandemic, COVID-19 task forces and expert groups often consist mainly of men. So designing and implementing the right measures for recovering from the pandemic downturn will be better if there is a diversity of perspectives, if women are part of the decision-making. And as you all know, the Commission put forward a proposal to address the lack of women on company boards in 2012. And I stay firmly behind it. And so I'm confident, do you? Now, as we rebuild, the Commission has been clear on gender equality. And the new Recovery and Resilience Facility, which entered into force on the 19th of February, provides funding to member states to plan for a gender-responsive recovery. But of course, women have to be there when we are planning this gender-responsive recovery. So member states must explain how they will mainstream gender equality and equal opportunities for all in their plans, and how the measures will contribute to achieving these objectives. The Commission will examine the recovery plans carefully for their gender dimension. So providing adequate, good quality care systems must be among the recovery measures. But we need to invest more into these systems. We will therefore make funding for them a priority. I therefore welcome the study done by EIGE that will help us in addressing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on gender equality and presenting gender-sensitive policy tools and financial instruments as part of the EU's response. And by freeing more women to fulfill their potential, we can build a fairer, stronger post-COVID-19 economy and society. I thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for your thoughts on these issues. As the Commissioner said, we have to mainstream equal opportunities for all the plans. So I think it's an excellent phrase that can show us how we can have a gender perspective and how we should have a gender perspective on all the plans, especially when the crisis affects people differently depending on their gender. We have heard 2 of the 5 women that are sharing with us today their perspectives, their knowledge, and their expertise on these issues. And now we are going to hear the 3rd one. She is the director of the European Institute for Gender Equality, Ms. Caroline Schiel. Let me tell you also that now you can make questions to our next guests. So you have a balloon of question and answer. If you have some questions, if you have something that you would like to ask our guests, just go there and ask your question. Now to the director of the European Institute for Gender Equality. So director, we have heard of unemployment unpaid work, family responsibilities, mental health issues. There are many things that we have to solve and to act on. These are some of the consequences of this COVID-19 crisis. What would you like to point out?
Well, thank you for giving me the floor, and good morning to you all. With International Women's Day just around the corner and the EU set to roll out its COVID-19 recovery package, as we just heard, across Europe, I think it's very timely that we are here today to discuss gender equality as the driving force behind the EU's recovery. As the Commissioner said, countries will have to show how their national economic recovery plans will advance gender equality when they apply for the money. This means putting gender equality at the heart of recovery, as every country will have to think about how their plans will impact equality between women and men. However, gender equality should not only be considered in the silos of a policy, but rather it needs to be mainstreamed into every stage of policymaking, including the design, implementation and monitoring, with a view not only to promote equality between women and men in all their diversity, but also to improve the quality of the policy itself. COVID-19 has triggered a number of worrying trends that risk derailing the gradual improvements in gender equality that have been made over the past decades. The findings from EIGE's forthcoming report on gender equality and the socioeconomic consequences of the COVID-19 crisis, which we have prepared at the request of the Portuguese presidency, give us some insights into the effects that the pandemic is having on the lives of women and men in the EU. Our study shows that following 5 years of growth at EU level, employment declined for both women and men in all EU member states at the start of the COVID-19 crisis. It's reduced by 2.2 million for women and by 2.6 million for men. Because there were less women than men in the labor market to begin with, employment declined for both groups by 2.4%. Rising employment rates during the summer of 2020 did not, unfortunately, lead to equal employment gains for women and men. Men gained more than twice as many jobs as women. The emerging statistics also show that only 170,000 women aged 25-49 gained jobs, compared with 440,000 men in the same age bracket. We must stress that labor market opportunities for women and men are different because of gender differences of their occupational profiles. Many of the sectors hit hardest by the pandemic are those with high rates of women's employment. Women working in retail, accommodation, residential care, domestic work and clothing manufacturing suffered heavy job losses, with the jobs lost in these sectors accounting for 40% of all women's lost employment during the first wave of COVID-19. As shown by sluggish economic performance across a number of these sectors, their chances of getting these jobs back is currently bleak. Time is starting to show that the economic impact of the pandemic is having long-lasting, scarring effects on women. One of the main reasons threatening to derail women's employment gains is the unequal sharing of care, which can hold women back from entering the job market or improving their career prospects. It is also a contributing factor to the gender pay gap and the gender pension gap later in life. Across the EU, it is no secret that the bulk of unpaid care work is done by women. Well, women's care work really exploded during the pandemic, with online schooling emerging as a new unpaid job, predominantly done by women. Men also increased how much they did at home, but women still clocked many more hours on the tasks that are essential to our well-being, but not remunerated. As the workplace moved into people's homes, time spent on cooking and housework increased for both women and men during the lockdown period. According to Eurofound's COVID-19 e-survey, European women dedicated 18.4 hours per week to cooking and housework, compared to 12.1 hours for men. In 2016, the figures were 15.8 for women and 6.8 for men. Both then and now, these burdens have been much higher for parents and those with other caring responsibilities. At the start of the pandemic, a big share of the EU population shifted to telework. The rates of people working from home are higher in households with children, and particularly among lone parents, suggesting that telework is used to balance work and family life, particularly among women. However, telework is not a solution for childcare. Our study shows that mothers have to deal with interruptions by children more often than fathers when teleworking. Constant distractions and extra care responsibilities for women lowers their productivity and could reduce their career progression and pay. While the pandemic has shown the potential of a digital workforce, teleworking has heightened work-life balance conflicts, especially for women with young children aged 0 to 5 years. The situation for lone parents can even be more difficult, especially when having to juggle working from home and caring for children alone. If they get sick, the situation gets even more complicated. Women make up almost 85% of all lone parents, and the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to increase the poverty risk for them and their children, making it harder to afford basic essentials like food and heating. This pandemic has highlighted the importance of care for a well-functioning society and economy. Yet the assumption that caring is still women's work, even when paid, contributes to its undervaluation. When thinking about recovery measures, it is important to also think about how to ensure a fairer distribution of unpaid care and how to better compensate those who provide care. For that, we need a dual approach that would support both equal sharing of care within families, as well as accessible, quality care services that provide their staff with decent salaries. First, we need changes at the household level, so that an equal sharing of care tasks between women and men becomes the norm. The impact of withdrawing from the labor market has to be made clear. Career interruptions to provide care leave women with far lower pensions than men across the EU. Unpaid work is a major reason behind old age poverty among women. Second, it is important that people have access to affordable professional care services that can help tackle the rising care needs expected in the EU as the population ages. The fact that women are still disproportionately responsible for caring and housework also makes it harder for them to find time for regular training to update their skills. As our world becomes increasingly digital, this is a worry. In order to keep up with digital innovation, people need to keep improving their skills if they want to take advantage of the new, well-paid jobs becoming available, which require a high level of digital skills. This is especially important as many women and men now find themselves out of work because of the pandemic. Adult education will play a major role in helping them to reskill and reintegrate into the labor market. However, caring responsibilities are holding women back from taking part in adult education and training. In the EU, on average, 40% of women compared to 24% of men cannot participate in lifelong learning due to family responsibilities. At the end of the day, Europe will bounce back from this pandemic, but only if gender equality is included in recovery measures. EU policymakers understand this, and this is why they have asked member states to show how their economic recovery plans promote gender equality when applying to access the EU's 672 billion recovery fund to help their economies get back on track. With this small win for gender equality, and knowing that the impact of the pandemic is different on women and men, there is no excuse for member states to ignore their different concerns when designing and implementing recovery measures. Ensuring gender equality will improve the lives of all EU citizens and drive recovery efforts as we navigate our way out of this pandemic together. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Thank you for sharing with us this research note to support the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union. It was very helpful. And now we are going to hear the comments by two experts. They are Lina Salanuskates. She is also from EIGE, from the Department of Research and Statistics. And we are also going to hear Lina Coelho. She is part of the European Commission, the National Gender Equality expert. But first, we are going to start with Lina Salanuskates. Lina, thank you for being with us. And please tell us what would you like to highlight about this research note.
Many thanks for this opportunity to give still a few more insights today. I'm happy to be one of the Linas participating in this webinar today. And I would start just saying that we have heard already today quite some number of issues that emerge with the crisis situations. We heard also about the emerging trends and consequences that we see already from the first statistics for women and men as regards their labor market situation due to the COVID-19 crisis. So let me give just a few more words on what further and major differences exist across women and men living across the EU. For example, we already know that employment has reduced by about 2.4% for women and men during the first lockdown period in spring 2020, if compared to a year before. This, however, hides major differences across age groups. For example, young people, especially young women, lost disproportionately more jobs. Their employment reduced not by 2.4%. It actually reduced by more than 10% for young women and by 9% for young men. These were the jobs making the first steps into the labor market for those with vocational educational qualifications, for example. These were student jobs allowing to continue studying. These were also first jobs allowing the first contributions to our social security systems. We also know from previous crises already that entering the labor market during a recession can negatively affect young people's labor market outcomes for a decade or longer. And this is especially of a concern for a current generation of younger women. Their limited job opportunities at graduation, as we see now, in addition to forthcoming detachment from the labor market due to disproportionate shouldering of childcare duties, implies major earnings penalties, not only now, but also in the future. This, among other things, might go hand in hand with lower access to social protection systems, including, for example, paid parental leave schemes. We can also already confirm that women in prime working ages, as Caroline mentioned already before, those, for example, aged 25 to 49 years, have major difficulties to return or stay on the labor market, even during the recovery periods that we saw in summer of 2020. Across the EU, we have seen increased exits to economic inactivity. Also, we saw, for example, the employment rate of migrant women dropping to below 50%, eradicating decades-long gains. For these women, it will be very difficult to get back to the labor market on the same steps as, on the same equal footing as men would be able to do. And it's not a surprise. Crisis-induced heightening of care responsibilities at home, and this is a major factor hindering labor market opportunities of women. In addition, we know women's situation on the labor market was already much more fragile before the start of the crisis in comparison to men. And this will shallow recovery, accumulating potentially further difficulties in life in terms of paid employment opportunities. If we would look not only into employment changes, but also into the total number of working hours, we know there were lots of government measures put forward to save employment. So we need sometimes to look into these more comprehensive measures, for example, total number of working hours, which takes a cumulative effect of losses, for example, on the labor market and shrinking number of hours, for example, in the main job. We could see that measures as such show that countries, for example, with higher gender equality index scores, like Denmark, registered among the lowest reduction in the total hours worked, both for women and men. And the latter data also show that almost in all EU countries for which data are already available now at this point, the decrease was more pronounced for women than for men. In particular, huge losses we observe in women's employment and in hours worked within main jobs in the southern European countries. The effects of the second wave and lockdowns are still to be seen, but these first signs coming out from the first lockdowns are already putting quite some thoughts forward of how we should go about it. We also know that much of the occurred loss in employment and in hours of work is related not only to the fact that women were disproportionately employed in the sectors that were most hit by the crisis, but also due to the fact that they were in much more precarious job situations, more part-time jobs, temporary jobs, seasonal jobs. This should be taken into consideration for recovery pathways. As my last words today, I would like to say that the labor market situation is clearly linked to work-life balance issues. School closures, reduction in the supply of childcare and dependent care services during lockdowns has major implications. Paid employment, either in a teleworking mode or not, is only possible to the degree of available time outside the duties that one has to assume. These duties are people. These are people in need of care. These are children, ailing parents, and others who depend on our help. Unfortunately, until today, we still need to dig really deep to find even statistics to demonstrate how vital are these links to our societies, to our labor markets and economies. Those who give care should be valued rather than penalized as regards paid employment or pension contributions. My personal wish to finish today's comments would be actually to see more of timely labor market statistics made available on the basis of household composition, not only across the sectors, but on the basis of household types, on the basis of care responsibilities. It would be very nice to see these statistics being presented among other major labor market and economy statistics. I hope we will have such figures for women and men readily available when developing, for example, recovery plans. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Lina. Thank you for bringing so many numbers that should be the basis to design some policies, because numbers are real people. So we are not talking about abstract numbers. We are talking about people that are actually inside of them. And now we are going to also have the contribution of Lina Coelho. She is from Portugal. She is a gender equality expert. Lina, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Good morning to you all. First of all, I would like to congratulate the Portuguese presidency for this initiative, marking the 2021 International Women's Day by focusing on how to pave the way for gender equality, being a driver for economic and social recovery. The detailed analysis of the EIGE's research note is a fundamental piece of knowledge that must keep on being updated in order to monitor latest developments and design policy measures to provide the adequate means to prevent increased gender inequality in the aftermath of the pandemic crisis. The findings just presented show that the crisis has been affecting disproportionately women. In spite of uneven effects across member states and social groups, it is possible to identify some common features across EU member states, both regarding groups of women who have been mostly affected and also the diversity of impacts felt by women. Overall, the most damaging impacts of the crisis seem to depend on the ways gender intersects with factors such as family and caring responsibilities, especially when having small children, and mostly in case of lone parenthood, and also responsibilities for elderly relatives and people with disabilities. Another factor, important factor, is the sector of employment and the occupation. Age, education level and qualifications, precariousness, and the typical employment situations. In order to build up a recovery driven by gender equality, it is crucial to fully consider some of the main challenges that SARS-CoV-2 brought for our social organization. I would sum up such challenges in 3 main points. My first point is that COVID-19 crisis is also a care crisis. By imposing social distance and reinforcement of healthcare needs, the pandemic generated a crisis in care provisioning, thus affecting mostly the lives of women according to traditional gender roles. But at the same time, the crisis forced all of us to realize that care is a fundamental pillar of social stability and social cohesion, and that the foremost goal of all necessary labor in society is care and existential security. This also means that the economic value of care work is now much more evident than it was before the pandemic. The lack of affordable, accessible, and high-quality care services in most EU countries, and the fact that care work is not equally shared between women and men, have a direct negative impact on women's ability to participate in all aspects of social, economic, and political life, and exposes women to the harshest impacts of crisis. A recovery driven by gender equality requires a care deal at European level, recognizing that care is a collective need that requires a collective responsibility. Such a deal on care implies investment in care provisions, work-life balance policies, and valuing the care sector, particularly regarding working conditions and pay, in light of the fact that the workforce in this sector comprises mainly women. Moreover, we can't forget that care services contribute to job creation and are more efficient than individualized care at home. My second point is that COVID-19 crisis steps up digitalization and dematerialization of activities and procedures, and significantly contributed to the growth of ICT activities and jobs. Social distancing and confinement induced a sharp increase in telework, online schooling, public e-services, and e-commerce, and also on online artistic events. This means a stepping up of the process of reform of the economy and jobs that may feed gender inequalities. given that women have less access, less exposure, and less experience with digital technologies than men. They are also less able to equally participate in the digital economy and are potentially disadvantaged when working remotely. Digitalization has the potential to put a diversity of jobs of the analogical era at risk, mostly affecting low and medium educated workers, namely in administrative and clerical support and retail trade, which most employ women. In order to prevent the widening of gender inequalities in the labor market and income, it is required to considerably strengthening training for women in the use of new technologies and to adopt effective measures to promote gender desegregation of education and vocational training, given that currently less than a quarter of STEM occupations and ICT specialists are women. Regarding this sector, it is also of utmost importance to assure that healthy competition and strong governance mechanisms are in place, namely regarding the taxation of digital economy and multinationals, which have increased their sales and profits substantially during the crisis. The third aspect I would like to mention is that the COVID-19 crisis exposed the fragilities of the regulated labor markets and the typical employment. As already referred today, women more than men are employed in non-standard forms of work, temporary and part-time jobs, and the informal economy, with higher risk of job and income losses and lower or no access to social protection. Most of those women work on essential services like healthcare, personal care, supermarkets, cleaning, and domestic help. Very often, those are young women and women from migrant backgrounds. To assure a recovery driven by gender equality, it is therefore crucial to establish a level playing field in the EU in terms of social protection and social security, and to meet the European Pillar of Social Rights, namely through developing the directives required to ensure adequate social protection and guarantee a decent income for all. Finally, it is decisive for a gender equality-driven recovery to include women, especially gender-sensitive economists, in economic policy planning at the European and national levels, and take binding measures for the equal representation of women in economic decision-making. And also to apply gender mainstreaming to budgets by adopting gender budgeting methodologies for all EU budgets and public spending across member states. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Lina, also for contributing with so many thoughts and expertise on these issues, also based on your work that you have been done also with the European Commission, but also in the faculties. And now we have two questions for you. So I will start with the first one, with the first, Lina, because it's about the data that has been presented here today in this morning. So considering the facts and the numbers that have been presented here, Lina, what would you like to highlight as the most critical areas that need immediate action at European level?
Many thanks for this question. I think I would like to start saying that, of course, crisis introduced measures in comparison to previous crises that we had, for example, financial crisis of 2008, 2009. So now we had a very different situation. Essentially what happened, privatization of care. So privatization, well, meaning that it went back to the private households. So care solutions, which are available now that we are coming out, hopefully out of the crisis periods, would certainly need to be taken into account when looking into what will happen on the labor markets. What is available in terms of the care solutions for those with care responsibilities. And just to perhaps illustrate why these kind of statistics are so important, I will give an example from our few years of experience. So, for example, working on the gender pay gap assessments. So when we look into the gender pay gap, very often we see no statistics in relation to household characteristics. We see across companies, across small companies, large companies, number of employees in the companies, its number of hours worked, etc. However, we do not see the links of how gender pay gap statistics is related for different household types. For women and men having children, for example, in certain age categories with certain care needs, etc. This kind of statistics would need to be made vital in terms of understanding where gender challenges on the labor market exist. Maybe one more personal dream in terms of statistics to be used would be economic assessments and economic forecast. Very often we see these figures, very elaborate, very sophisticated figures, nicely presented across sectors, across countries, across different dimensions. We do not see these figures being presented for women and men, though we know that there is a huge gender segregation on the labor market. And what we knew in terms of these assessments is actually very much blind in terms of women and men struggling in terms of labor market opportunities and choices. So more of these gendered statistics, not only for women and men, but also in relation to the issues that are at stake when we talk about the gender norms, about the gender challenges, would be very good to see in terms of the forthcoming statistics that would be present, for example, in the recovery plans. Many thanks.
Thank you, Lina. I'll now post the second question to the second Lina, and then Caroline, if you want to add something, I will also pass you the virtual stage. So, Lina Coelho, this one is for you. A major conclusion is that recovery measures must be gender responsive. What instruments do you think are important to ensure this in the long term at European level?
Well, I thank you very much. I have just referred to some of them. In fact, the non-standard working positions and jobs and contracts that women are more subject to is a huge problem in terms of gender equality. And so the adoption of measures at European level to ensure a minimum income for a life that can be sustainable. And also full coverage of social security for all workers, independently of their types of contracts, are of utmost importance for women. They are, of course, important for everyone, but they are mostly important for women, and especially for the most fragile, vulnerable women, those that are entering the labor market, younger women, also younger men, of course, and women from migrant backgrounds who work on the most vulnerable positions in labor market, many times doing essential jobs that this crisis show are crucial for our living. And so this is a major kind of measures that are important to guarantee the improvement in gender equality in the long term. But of course, the question of care and the way we provision care in our societies is a fundamental question for assuring long-term, more equal society in terms of gender. Because everyone today said that one of the main roots of gender inequality is the unequal distribution of care, and the value that is not recognized, the economic value that is not recognized to non-paid care that is mostly produced by women in our societies. And this crisis shows clearly how everything does not work when care doesn't work. And so the building of a collectively organized provision of care is a decisive measure to ensure that we'll have a more gender equality society. Of course, that there will be always some care that must be provided at family level, but there it is very important that men and women share equally these needs of family care. And I would say, I think I'm being very ambitious, but I would say that this redistribution of care would be viable if we all have a better distribution of employed timetables with less hours of work for everybody, which would, of course, create the opportunity for more people in employment and a better redistribution of employment and non-paid care work. Thank you.
Lina, we actually do have a question about the exactly thing that you have just mentioned about the economic value of care. And the question is not only to you, but to the three of you, if you want to share your thoughts on this, is do you believe that all EU member states agree on that and acknowledge that value? So do we have like a common sense about it? Or do you think there are differences between the countries in EU?
Well, I think there are different perceptions, maybe, but it is only a question of reasonable thinking, because it is very useful to think in counterfactual terms in this matter. Imagine a world where women doesn't furnish non-paid care. What kind of situation would we have if that wouldn't exist? Non-paid care is a fundamental pillar of the way our societies and our economies function. Without non-paid care, they wouldn't function like they are today. So it's a very rational thing. It's for those who don't recognize the economic value of care, I propose this counterfactual thinking. Imagine a world where non-paid care wouldn't exist. And this makes us realize very quickly the economic importance of care.
Carolina, I would like to ask you, as the director of the European Institute for Gender Equality, so that you have a broad perspective of EU, do you think there is a common sense on this, or do you think there are work to be done in showing the importance of the economic value of care? Because we have a lot of unpaid care now. And what can we do to make this unpaid care, like more equally distributed between men and women, and also to be paid if there's an option?
Well, thank you for that question. And if I may, I would also like to share a few other considerations with you. No, I don't think that in each and every country the situation is exactly the same. And that's at the same time, I think also the beauty of discussions on comparing member states, on collecting data. There's challenges lying ahead without any doubt, but at least there's a discussion between the member states on these issues, and I think that's very relevant. And so maybe a few words on the topic that we are discussing today, because as you know, we worked on this, let's say, study for the Portuguese presidency, but our aim is actually to connect the impact of the COVID-19 crisis to all our future work. Because even if there's differences between member states, sometimes we do not have enough data to see what these differences are. EIGE works closely together with the EU presidencies. So our plan is for each and every topic that we will focus on in the future, we will propose to link the impact of the COVID-19 crisis to that work. And I think the basis for changes in the EU and in each and every member state starts with the provision of information and data and showing the consequences of not taking gender equality into account. If I may give a few examples on the topic we're discussing today, we will publish the publication in June, but of course we will not stop collecting information and data. We will continue to do so. And as you all might know, we have a gender equality index at EIGE, and the index 2022 next year will focus specifically on the COVID-19 consequences on gender equality, the impacts for that will be sustainable and that we have to take into account. So that's I think it all starts with providing information, collecting data, showing what is going on in each and every single member states and in the EU. And to be honest, I put big hopes on the national plans that are being drafted now by member states for the recovery. Hopefully, when doing a solid analysis and doing a good gender impact assessment, member states will see themselves where the challenges lie for them. And let's wait for these plans and what they show and what information they give. It's something to look forward to, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Lina, the second Lina, would you like to add anything?
I think there were already very comprehensive remarks said, so maybe just one last point in terms of my side. I would want to say that gender equality is, of course, for both women and men. And so especially when we talk about the care distribution, very often we start up from the household level. We see what is the distribution between women and men of the care that they have to do at home. And we see lots of differences there with, of course, the major burden still falling on the woman's shoulders in terms of caring for children, etc. We also see some signs of improvement, and we also see lots of surveys coming out saying men would want to take more of these responsibilities, but there are challenges. So just to give an example, it would be a parental leave. EIGE has recently made a study about the non-eligibility to parental leave, and we see major gaps for both women and men across the member states. So now just connecting back to whether we believe the care is at the core of our societies, I think these gaps should be further identified, because there are also gaps that we know, there are gaps that we do not know. So more studies, more attention to that should be paid, I think, from all member states. There is certainly room for improvement. Many thanks.
Thank you, Lina. More studies and also more action. That's why we are also doing this webinar. And I think it's the end of it. It passed really quickly. Let me just stretch some key points that were marked here from our 5 women participating on this webinar. That's also victory, because usually we don't have 5 women or like all of the guests are women. Usually it's the opposite. It's more men than women, but I guess because we are talking about gender equality, we have more women participating, and that's also something that has to change. So bringing men to this conversation. And today here in this morning, you all have exposed that the crisis has reinforced the existed gap, has exposed fragilities, and a lot of topics that have to be addressed by the governments, by the NGOs, and by the economic responsibles, like unpaid work, unemployment, work-life difficult balance, few women in decision-making, but also trying to help women in gaining more skills to reintegrate the digital world. So we don't have just to try to solve this crisis, but to think about the future and how they will occupy their stage again, and how they will reverse these difficult times. Gender equality is a human rights problem and a human rights cause, and it's not just a women's cause. So thank you all for being with us in this webinar of the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union. It was a pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you all for existing and watching through all Europe. This is a really important conversation for us, and hope to see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.